welcome everyone to this second part in the Therapeutic Astrology podcast with Maurice Fernandez and myself. It is now my 40th birthday, and it's right on the eclipse, and we have finished 4 or 5 days of you teaching, Maurice, and me learning a lot. And so we thought to come back and just do a little bit of a second part here. I have so many questions for you because I want to begin actually by complimenting you and your teachings, because it's astrology, obviously, and it's based on reading a chart, obviously, but it's also spiritual teachings. And I find myself in a room filled with people who come for that reason as well. Like, what are we here for, and how can we grow and learn together and do what we are meant to do?
Asking the deep questions. I think spiritual development, is something that, whether we're conscious about it or not, we're all in it. And I think one of my main point, if we summarize our studies, that we often see spiritual development as an ascension, going back to the world of spirit that is beyond the material. And yet, one of the deepest spiritual work is to descend into matter. I think that's where we have so much crisis in the world, that we live in a fragmented reality where spirit is divorced from matter. And then we have sexual abuse, and we have the abuse of the earth. And, astrology is a study of life. So every time we have any kind of crisis, it is a remedy. It offers perspective. Okay, where does that fit? What's activating this problem? So
so in there we have the knowledge of how to get further with it, grow as we're supposed to.
Because one of the great gifts of astrology is that it shows the problem, but it also shows where it's coming from. And that's what gives you a clue to resolve it.
And so last time we spoke a little bit about neurodiversity, and I don't even know what's a hot topic anymore, Maurice, because now we have wars and a lot of things are going on collectively. But it has been one of the great movements of our time, that so many people, from high status people to low status people, can identify these symptoms in themselves. Of course, it's different with the symptoms, but it has to do with, I think, the pressure and the stress on the brain. So now we have Uranus moving in to Gemini for a longer time. How's that gonna affect our brain, and what do you think about this?
We mentioned that neurodivergence is often associated with the archetype of Aquarius and Uranus, and then Pisces and Neptune. Why? Because these two archetypes represent what is beyond physical form and incarnation. So in a positive way, they represent our ability to go beyond the physical, to understand our spiritual identities and, the unifying fields. That's why during the conjunction of Uranus and Neptune in the 90s, we had this internet revolution that completely changed how we view time and space. Because everything happened so quickly, and we could be everywhere at once at a click of a button. So the material world became a virtual world. And then you have a whole generation born into that.
Growing
up with that. And so we speak about neurodivergence there's an adaptation of the brain to a completely different frequency. They operate in a way with Uranus and Neptune. The speed is not the same as it was before. Now, we all have Uranus and Neptune in our charts, but when they actually come together in such a way, it activates in a way, the spiritual part of our consciousness and brain and biology. But what can happen, one of the risks, is that there's a disconnect between the spiritual body and the physical body. And what can often happen with neurodivergence, and I'm generalizing here, I'm also not a doctor, so we're talking here from a purely astrological point of view, is that there is a sync problem where the brain and the neurological system can be working at a different speed that the biological hormonal body responds to. And so the signals are not always, in a way, integrated the way that can be easy or beneficial.
Yeah, because it's like you're picking it up, but then you have to live your everyday life in your body,
and there can be a lot of emotional difficulty also. You can be either detached or suddenly overreacting emotionally, feeling flooded. So there's a feeling of not being in sync. Now, there can be also external trauma that obviously triggers that, whether it's a past life story or it's, this life story. But it represents something that is even bigger than us, is that because we're moving into a time with Uranus in Gemini and this generation that activated Neptune and Uranus, we live now in periods of time where we have to compute much more information than we ever did in the history on Earth.
Yes.
So, what was one incarnation 100 years ago, whatever you accomplished, whatever you studied, how, is different from an incarnation in the 21st century where we can be in 10 countries at the same time and absorb an immense amount of data, of images, of realities. So our brain has to process much more input than ever before, which means that our brain is adapting. It needs to morph. It's a natural biological process of adaptation that takes some time. And in the meantime, we can feel that our brain is going faster than our body, that we feel overwhelmed.
So this is actually what's going on. It's an upgrade.
It's an upgrade of our brain. And Uranus in Gemini is exactly about that. Because Gemini has to do with cerebral functions and actually organizing knowledge. And Uranus says, speed it up, higher, faster. And this will make us different beings. We will acquire different faculties. Our brain is growing. But in the meantime, until this actually settles, we have too much screen time, our eyes are suffering, our emotions are not integrating. And, when you think about even psychologically, young people who are in their teens and in the early stages of development that are constantly absorbing, the Epstein file and the wars and how systems are collapsing. So it's a lot to take in when you just try to figure out, what's happening Sunday. So there's also an emotional component here of being bombarded with crisis, with big world problems that are too much for someone who's just, in a young body.
Yeah, for anyone really. Also, when we have to talk about it, it's probably too much for anyone.
Yeah.
To get that, and then there's also the addictive part of it.
But
we get hooked.
It get hooked. And it's programmed to also dramatize But when you say it's too much, at some point it won't be too much.
Yes.
Because our biology is gonna adapt to that.
Will we live though? Are we gonna be alive?
To some extent, depending how far we go. But we have to understand that as much as it's intense, there can be, if we are smart about it, there can be a positive purpose to that.
Yeah, good.
Because think about a computer. 50 years ago, a computer took forever to perform 5 operation or 1 operation, and today we have little phones that can do so much at the same time. It helps humanity go ahead, access dimensions, capacities that were never accessible before.
So it's going to turn out great. I want to also just ask you a little bit more of a question around the spiritual development. So what this can lead to when we are really busy is that we miss, like you're talking about, the integration in the body. That's why I think therapy is great, because we are kind of taking back to that constantly. How does it feel in your body? But not everyone can afford or want to go to therapy all the time. So if we just go ahead with this wave of speed progress.
I mean, there are different types of therapy, because when you have neurodivergence or I would say, overload, and our brains are trying, to do all the work, and we end up fried. One thing that can also help is actually somatic therapies, things that are nonverbal, body work, water therapies, things that ground you or relax you or helps things slow down. So it's not always the astrology or the therapy that can work, because it can be more words and more brain, unless you combine it with that.
Yeah, exactly. But what I was getting at is something that you've spoken about and written about extensively with spiritual bypassing, and how we see that's also something that's coming up, and we want to be careful not to blame people for just being people, right?
Yeah.
There's that. But there is also maybe some consequences to having had power as a spiritual teacher and then not having looked too closely at yourself.
I mean, it's a global problem, and as everything, when there's a crisis, it's also a blessing in disguise, that it's an opportunity to fix it. So yes, I spoke about this. There's an important video on my YouTube channel, Maurice Fernandez, Evolutionary Astrology. Spiritual bypassing is, in a way, part of this divorce between matter and spirit, where we go high to the higher realms, to the higher wisdom, without taking the time to actually walk the talk. And so we speak about unconditional love, and we speak about the virtues of peace and the virtues of global healing, and then we cannot really be able to commit in a relationship. And those wise teachers encourage beautiful things, spiritual things, but they are not always the role models, and we see a lot of dysfunction in their own life. And like you say, there's an element of humanity in the fact that even being spiritually evolved, you have shadow and you make mistakes, but there's a difference to what degree, and how many of these mistakes. And I think the greatest, I would say, most grotesque and most I would say, shocking experience is when you see that there's sexual abuse in spiritual institutions, in churches, or
Yeah.
where, you're supposed to be so virtuous and humble, and you do the opposite.
So it's a wake up call for spiritual teachers as well as people who are learning from them. And you had a question in your teaching the other day that I would like your own answer to, because I remember your question was, then how do we know? How do we know that this is a spiritual teacher where we can trust and we can follow this teaching? What is your own answer to that?
What did I say? What did I answer?
I think you asked us, and there was a bunch of things came up. I think you actually mentioned relationships.
I think, like, again, what's going on in this person's life? Number one, are they selling you something impossible? So always, even in a spiritual world, you see humility when you say, I'm not owning the truth. I'm making a suggestion. This is not the supplement that will, guarantee 500-year life.
Yeah.
So all these kind of grandiose,
it will fix everything.
It will fix everything.
Yeah.
This is the solution. If you meditate every day, if you stop masturbating, if you take this supplement, it will take away the pain. And that's the hook, because nobody likes pain. And that is the danger when somebody sells you something that's not realistic. So that's number one, when it's too good to be true.
Yes, it probably is.
And so there's that aspect of how do we handle pain? The other thing is those who are more grounded and are walking their talk are also not going to sell themselves as, we are the power couple and we never fight, and we live unconditional love and our sex is tantric, and then a year later they're in a court fighting for the copyrights of their bestseller.
So in a way, they don't even need to say that. They don't need to promote themselves as such. Is that what you're saying?
In some ways you can suggest it, but there's a level of let's take ourselves a little less seriously. Let's understand that there's humor in everything, and that I may have knowledge, but I acknowledge that also I have my blind spots. So it's walking the talk. Are you yourself applying this to your own life?
Yeah. I have one last question for you, and that is, I have now turned 40 years old, and you have looked a lot at my chart. Did like 10 hours of reading my chart yesterday, I feel. And you've also seen that I'm in a period where I need to establish my own voice, to put it like that. And I'm gonna be teaching what you have taught me. Of course, it will come through me, and I won't be able to remember all of the sections that are in your mental library, but I'm gonna be really, really inspired by you. What do you want me to remember? What is so important? I don't want to say the most important, just something that's really important from Maurice Fernandez when I'm carrying on the torch.
I have to think about that, and I'll come back tomorrow. In a simple way, it's understanding the sacredness of astrology. The fact that today we live in a world where everything is so accessible. Everything is accessible at a push of a button. And we end up feeling entitled, and being experts in the quick download. And I think one of the important things to convey is to give astrology respect and treat it with reverence as a sacred knowledge.
Yeah.
So understanding that it's an initiation and it's a responsibility to be an astrologer, because it's amazing that we have access to this knowledge, but because it's amazing, it can also be misused, abused,
And
and then
misunderstood.
and then cause harm.
Yeah, I mean misunderstood and can be very prejudiced about it, and so there's many ways it can fail. But it's so amazing how and when you study it like so intensely that we have now, it's like, how can this be? I'm constantly living out these archetypes. It's like
it's a gift,
yeah.
and when we receive gifts, we are grateful and we don't take them for granted.
Yeah.
So happy birthday.
Thank you.
You know, it's an eclipse solar return, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a big year
Yeah.
of self-actualization.
Yes.